Vader. The High Prince of Vermin extends his domains. No pleasure eludes him, no treasure or gain, and down with the dregs of rebellion. You cheer, mesmerized by the demoniac sheen, exhaust what's left of the honey of dawn, and only then sense the debacle. You stretch your tongues to the now arid trough, mill witless as kine through a pasture aflame, while fearfully brazens the trumpet. Hello, I am Colonel Klaus Graf von Schenk-Stauffenberg, and I am engaged in high treason with all the resources at my disposal. I need your help. As members of the German resistance, we are trying to stop this war. Our plan is to assassinate Adolf Hitler and stage a coup. Although we will fail, most likely, it is worth our sacrifice to end this tyranny. Operation Valkyrie was a plot during World War II by the German military to assassinate Adolf Hitler and stage a coup, according to Killing Hitler by Roger Morehouse. Valkyrie was one of many plots by the German resistance. They had many motivations for resisting, mostly the atrocities that happened all over Europe against the civilians of Jewish and Gypsy descent and many others. For example, the Dubno incident, a small town in Eastern Europe where the civilians were lined up and they were forced to dig their own mass grave, and they were lined up and they had to lie down and they were shot, and then the next victims had to lie down on top of them and they were then shot. A witness to this was Axel van der Busch, who would later plot to kill Hitler, according to Morehouse. Another complication of theirs was that they're unknown to each other because of they'd be known as traitors, so they were very careful with who they talked to, and so they're unknown to each other for that reason. And because of this, it was very hard to get anything done, according to Plotting Hitler's Death by Joachim Fest. Despite the drawbacks, many would sacrifice their lives in order to accomplish this goal. Some noted assassins and conspirators were Henning von Trisco, who plotted many different attempts, notably his museum attempt, where Hitler was going to take a tour of a museum exhibit, so he had the first suicide bomber as a tour guide. Unfortunately, Hitler ran through the museum in about 2 minutes, and the bomb didn't get a chance to explode. His next attempt would be putting bombs on Hitler's plane. He disguised them as brandy bottles. Unfortunately, the detonation cap was a dud, and the bombs didn't explode and had to be recovered, or else the pot would be discovered. Next, I go on to conspirator and later assassin Klaus von Stauffenberg. Originally on the Eastern Front, he was witness to many atrocities there, and he objected to them and spoke out against them. And he was discharged from there and sent to North Africa. In the sunny desert of North Africa, an airplane barrage strafed his vehicle, and he lost his left eye, his right hand, and all but 3 fingers on his left hand, according to Codename Valkyrie by James Foreman. He returned to Germany and recovered at his castle in Lothringen. He was then approached by Tresco, where he was assigned to the staff of the Reserve Army in Berlin. The Reserve Army was tasked with defending the capital. And there he had the opportunity to alter Operation Valkyrie. Operation Valkyrie was a plan that would help defend against paratroop landings, an SS coup, or a foreign labor uprising. And it would utilize the barracks, the training facilities, the home army, all the units at home to defend. And Stauffenberg's main change of this was to have the plan activate when Hitler died, so that the units would be used to take over the government, and then they could surrender. Some assassins that Stauffenberg employed were Axel van der Busch, as you may know, who agreed to detonate grenades in front of Hitler at a uniform inspection. However, the uniforms were destroyed in an air raid. Axel lost a leg on the Eastern Front, and as a replacement assassin never got a chance because the inspection was canceled. Next, Stauffenberg approached Colonel Helmut Steiff, who had access to Hitler. He went to his briefings, and there he would take a briefcase bomb filled with British explosives, and he would detonate them. Unfortunately, he chickened out and gave the explosives to Stauffenberg, the 3-fingered, 1-eyed assassin, who also had to make calls in Berlin to get the rest of the conspiracy going. It was very, very difficult for him to play both roles, once again according to Morehouse. Stauffenberg as the assassin was the only possibility when he was promoted to colonel in July of 1944, and would be giving briefings directly to Hitler on the Reserve Army. His plan was he would have his briefcase bomb, and basically it was captured British time explosives, and there was a pencil detonator. And inside the pencil detonator, it was made of metal. There was a glass vial with acid inside, and using his 3 fingers, he had to crush this acid capsule, and then that would activate a 10-minute fuse that would detonate a percussion cap that would detonate the explosive. And basically, that was the first part of the plan, to drop that off at the briefing and then leave. Secondly, Eric Felgable, who was the communications officer at the time where the attack took place, was charged with shutting down the communications after he sent a message to Berlin telling them to start Valkyrie. That way there was no cross lines. And the Valkyrie orders would say, Hitler's dead, arrest the SS, the Nazi leaders, and then that would commence. And this is once again according to Morehouse. They had a very small chance of success, but they knew they had to try. The days before, many resistance members were arrested. The months leading up to that, around 250 resistance members were arrested per day, and constant exposure to the plot was seen. They were extremely on edge. And unfortunately, 5 days before July 20th, on July 15th, Stauffenberg had his explosives with him. He went into Rosenberg, where the Wolf's Lair, where the attack took place, and he was going to detonate his explosives, but unfortunately something happened and he did not. And the Valkyrie orders went out prematurely and almost exposed all the conspirators. However, they were able to shrug it off as a drill, and unfortunately they had to postpone it for 5 more days. The plot was quickly unraveling and it was time to act. Rosenberg once again, on July 20th, Stauffenberg returned with his suitcase and his explosives. He armed them. In the morning, he went into the briefing with the suitcase, and before he went in there, he had his aide, Werner von Haften, and basically he was interrupted while he's arming the explosives and could only arm one. He had 2 with him. He went into the briefing with 1 explosive, dropped it off, excused himself for an emergency call to Berlin, and let's start the first one. Excused himself for an emergency call to Berlin. Basically, this is a large wood oaken table. An explosion took place. And after this happened, he had to escape because the entire place was in high alert. He had to get past 3 checkpoints, heavily armed, and he was able to persuade them to let him pass. He boarded a plane back to Berlin, where he had to commence the rest of Valkyrie, where he had to call all over Europe, had to commence all the conspirators all together to rile up, to rebel, to arrest the SS. But Felgable, the communications officer's message to Berlin was that Hitler's alive. And so everyone was like, what do? We can't do Valkyrie. So while they're supposed to start all the orders, right when the assassination happened, they waited. While Stauffenberg was flying to Berlin many hours. And by the time he arrived, nothing happened. The plot was already unraveling around their heads. They were already being hunted down. And now they're trying to call and rally people to their cause. And they're refusing because it's already lost. And basically they made their last efforts. They called all around. They gathered their conspirators who were still able and willing. And eventually they were rounded up. And basically the commander from whom they tried to get on the conspiracy refused. And he had them executed in those target respects because they were witnesses. Stauffenberg's last words were, "Long live sacred Germany." He was executed along with Ludwig von Beck, Friedrich Olbricht, Merz von Kornheim, and Werner von Haften. The other conspirators were assassinated all over the country. Trisco committed suicide, and many, many died. Thousands died. Stauffenberg's brother was hung multiple times and revived and hung multiple times. Their families were sent to concentration camps, and many died. Many sacrificed. However, they knew the odds. They knew they had little chance of success. Part of the cause of failure was the fact that they did not use the spare bomb. If he had put both bombs in his briefcase, then it wouldn't have just been 2 times. It would have been many times. Everybody in that room would have been killed. And unfortunately, they did not do that. It's also thought that one of the people in the room moved the suitcase onto the other side of the chair leg. And it was a thick oak wooden table, and it shielded Hitler from the blast. He was on the other side of the chair leg, and he was barely wounded at all from it. And the other thing was, if he had detonated the explosive 5 days earlier, in his first chance, July 15th, the briefing was held in an enclosed bunker where the blast would have had no room to escape, and it would have had a very tight killing field. On July 20th, it was in an open room with open windows, the blast was dispersed, and very, very much less effective, once again according to Foreman. 4.8 million people died in the last 9.5 months of the war, at least. Berlin was invaded from both sides by the Allies. Hitler instead of being captured, committed suicide, and Germany was forced to unconditionally surrender, according to Fest. After Germany's surrender, we look back at all that's happened. The resistance tried valiantly to stop the war. On July 20th, they attempted to assassinate Hitler and stage a coup. And although this failed, with their deaths and many others died, Hitler was eventually defeated less than a year later. World War II was a dark time. Millions of lives were lost. The crimes against humanity can never be erased from our history. However, we can honor those that sacrificed to stop evil. It is better to die with honor than to live with shame.